So I'm at an estate at Finsbury in Islington, and inside is an old burial site. This burial site was for Quakers. Now, Quakers were the most radical revolutionaries in Christendom, and to this day, they are hugely influential in industry, running banks, anything you can think of. Quakers have a hand in it. Now, during the Blitz, the graveyard was pretty much wrecked. So this estate here, Quaker Court, was built on top of it. But inside is still the famous meeting hall or meeting house of the Quakers, and a small area that gives reference to the fact that many Quakers, I think it was up to about 170 something, 177 or a number like that, Quakers were buried here during the Great Plague of 1665. So let's have a walk in, and you'll see as I'm walking in, on the right is the old-fashioned Victorian looking Quaker meeting house, and to the left is the new build estate. And here, obviously, Islington Council allows the Quakers to advertise who and what they are on the lead up to their site. Now, to show just how liberal the Quakers were, their name gives you a real insight. So you can see it written on the building there, Society of Friends. It was a real happy, clappy, non-official way of being a religious rebel. And Quakers had a huge hatred for things like oaths, because it binded you to something. Quakers had left the idea of Calvinism, of Anglicanism, of Church of England, which had a predetermined idea of how your fate would be from class system, which I have mentioned previously. Whereas the Quakers, they felt that their connection with God is just as powerful as any pope, and that they can predetermine their fate. This can be either seen as a genuine religious doctrine, or it can be seen as a way of incorporating rebellious activities into a time that was rife with blasphemy laws. England was under the reign of the Lord Protectorate of Oliver Cromwell, a very violent and anti-Catholic, anti-papist man. At the time, there was much confusion, and there was various sects of these rebellious Christians who were becoming tired of, they'd been spoilt by breaking free of Catholicism. And for many of these factions, it still wasn't good enough. The Church of England was still too staunch, it still binded them down, and things like Quakerism was that escape. And a man called George Fox is attributed to being one of the main founders. George Fox himself, who traveled to America, is said to be in that park there. And let me remind you how important Quakerism is, not just today, financially, industrially, and politically, but William Penn, who went over to America, is the reason that we have the name Pennsylvania. The Quakers were very, very influential then, and they are now. But even during this time, Parliament did slightly get sick of them and eventually did put sanctions on them because they were becoming quite a threat. And obviously, where some of its high ups had been in the Civil War as members of the army, they knew they were capable of organisation and violence. This meeting hall is actually being used right now. It's in use today, and myself and my cameraman actually saw a load of people out the front and using the garden facility right now. Now, when this first started in this location, it would have been a tent, then it turned into a metal shed type of building that they'd all meet in. And during the times that they would be told off or told you're not allowed to meet anymore, they would have to hide away in the same way that Catholics did and use very, very clever methods to do so. So buildings like this are a representation of the hardship, and what Quakers have pulled through as a result. Quaker Gardens. Now let's just take a moment to look where we actually are. Come with me. Before we go in there, look where we are. We are in the heart of an estate in Islington. So it's a very unusual bit of geography right here. For us to be walking into a cemetery which is so relevant during even the 1600s, to be smack bang in the middle of a relatively newly built modernist estate. Fantastic old Victorian school, just snugly set beside the I suppose it is a cemetery in its own way, because there are many, many souls that have been buried here. And I wonder how interesting and fascinating it must have been to have done the renovation job here. When you was making it, when they had the contractors in, I imagine they had a lot of archaeologists, they had a lot of very interesting people, dare I say, from the British Museum. Digging this up would have been an absolute nightmare. I mean, for the builders, that is. I've worked on such sites. I was on a site in the suburbs of England, and every week or 2 weeks they'd have to shut the site down because they kept finding World War II bombs or bones that they couldn't be sure what they were from. You'd have to get an archaeologist out. They could be worth money. And that's one of the fascinating things about construction or demolition work, or any form of work in medieval old places, wonderful places. London is like Rome. It is just, it's impossible to move an inch without finding something worth discovering. This garden is on the site of Bunhill Fields Burial Ground, which is acquired by the Society of Friends. Now, let's not confuse this with the nonconformist Bunhill Fields Burial Ground, which is round the corner, which is where a lot of Puritans were buried, merchants were buried. This is purely for Quakers, right? So around the corner, you might get a mixture of Anglicans, Calvinists, maybe a Quaker, who knows? But this was for the Quakers. So this garden is on the site of Bunhill Fields Burial Ground, which was acquired by the Society of Friends, which is a very peculiar name, I'm sure everyone will admit, for a section of Christianity. Quakers in 1661. The remains of many thousands of Friends lie buried here, including George Fox, the founder of the Society of Friends, who died 13th of January 1691. Another huge name like that of George Fox was someone who was said to be in competition with him in the world of Quakerism, is James Naylor. Now, if he was to be cruel, you would suggest that these men had some serious psychological issues, as both Fox and Naylor assumed that they were prophets, if you like. They believed that they could perform miracles, and they believed that they could hear the word of God. Now, Naylor, in the 1600s, once approached a particular town and reenacted the suffering of Jesus. He came in on a horse, trying to reenact the suffering of Jesus. And the Puritan magistrates at the time went absolutely mad, calling for his death, because this is blasphemy of the highest order. They wanted his tongue pulled out. They wanted hundreds of lashes, you name it, they wanted it done. And it was actually Oliver Cromwell, allegedly, this authoritarian dictatorial ruler, who came in and allegedly said, no, he won't be killed. Now, this is aiding radical revolutionaries. And one of the excuses he's said to have given was, we made the mistake with Jesus already. How do you know that this man isn't the Messiah? We don't want to make the same mistake again. And anyone in their right mind would say, well, this isn't the Messiah. He's a very naughty man. But instead, Oliver Cromwell sort of used this religious excuse to save him. It was Naylor who was considered a little bit more radical than George Fox. But George Fox, once again, remains as the more famous of them, he's attributed to being the actual organizer or founder, though he isn't. He's one of many names. Many names actually died in prison of the leaders of the Quakers during their arguments with Parliament, because during the times that they were being suppressed, they would rebel, because the Quakers were not just rebellious in the way that they were a new sect of Christianity. They actively went after other people's sermons. So they would walk into your church and disturb you. They weren't just leaving people alone, they were messing with people. And this was allowed to happen for quite a long time until they were gaining support and they learnt the law well enough that they could disturb a church. And when people turned up to arrest them, they'd say, well, here's the laws, we're allowed to do so. Now, one of the reasons that the Quakers must have unified so well must have been they're natural born rebels. So the law that was brought in 1662, the Act of Uniformity, would have driven them into a fight or flight mode. Either we get clever, we start becoming sneaky, or we disband. The Act of Uniformity basically meant that all citizens of the kingdom had to adopt the beliefs of the Church of England. And the Church of England was controlled by Parliament. James II famously hated Quakers and would have certainly backed Parliament. He would have been very much involved in this idea and the various changing in laws to try and prevent Quakers from gaining too much power. In saying that, as we all know, if you censor something, it gives people a sense of bravery and a form of camaraderie. And I feel that the banning, or it wasn't so much a banning, it was the expectation for everyone to fall into the uniform of Church of England would have certainly helped drive the rebellious and revolutionary minds that formed Quakerism. So I just went in to ask the Quakers if they would like to talk to me, and apparently they're having a meeting of silence. So I suppose we'll take off. For those that don't know, that's what a meeting of silence looks like. Come over here, cameraman. I wouldn't want you to miss this spiritual moment. To say that it wasn't a little bit eerie would be a lie, because I walked up and I was waiting for someone to say to me, "Can we help you?" And they were just anyway, wonderfully preserved cemetery. Obviously, you can come see it. As you can see, you're free to walk in, and they're relatively friendly. I'm sure if they weren't in a silent prayer, they would have given me a few pointers. Lovely, strange little building, that, isn't it? And look at see the Union flags hanging up there. So that's in relation to us recently losing a monarch. Anyway, fantastic little cemetery, and we'll see you soon. Take care.